think it all sucks. I think it all sucks. 日本の人なんですけどね、九州の熊本まで行って石牟礼道子さんっていう人がいて、物を描いてられる方なんですけど、その人に会いに行った時になんかとっても素晴らしい経験をして、いろんな人に出会うと、なんていうのかな、素晴らしい人に出会うと、その出会いが自分の中ですごくこう蓄積されていくっていうか、血となって肉となっていくみたいな感じをすることがある、感じを受けることがあるんですけど、その中でもやっぱしとっても良かったですね。最初会った時はなんかお化けみたいな人で、これはまずいなと思って、これはちょっと人選間違えたかなとか思ったんだけど、話してるうちにだんだん美しくなってきて、なんかこういろんなとこでその人の人間の素晴らしさを感じさせてもらって、帰る時は涙が止まんないっていう感じですよね。僕はニューヨークにいて、ニューヨークの人を特に撮ってるというわけじゃないんですけど、逆に言うと自分がクリアになっていくっていうか、そういう部分がありますね。僕はたまに東京に戻ったりとかするんですけど、東京に行くともう自分がわけわかんなくなってくるというか、いうのがあってて、みんなが本当に何したいのかってよりもなんかね、なんかルールみたいなのがあって、それの中に入ってる人が多いんだけど、そうじゃなくて、ここにいると結構みんな僕が何しようがあなたが何しようが別に気にならないわけだから、それに感知もしないし、自分が一生懸命階段登れを登った分登れるし、何もしないでずるずる落っこっていけばそのまま落っこっていけるし、そういうのはものすごくクリアですよね。で、ある意味で人に対してなんていうのかな、前知識でもって人を判断しないっていうか、いうところが多いですよね。自分がこれあるんだよ、素晴らしいね、君は素晴らしいっていうストレートですよね、そういう意味じゃね。だからここにいると自分がクリアになって、それで他に行くっていう感じもありますね。だからどんな面白いんですけど、ニューヨークはアフリカの僻地に行って、すごく人と人の出会いがものすごく単純で、ものすごく深くなってきてとか、そういう出会いがありますよね。それがなんていうのかな、ある意味で似たようなものもここにあるんですよね。シックですね。シック、完全に病気ですね。吐き気催してくるよね。電車から窓で街かなんか見てると、もう人間の変な部分だとか、変な欲だとか、それからなんていうのかな、汚い部分だとか、もう自分が一人で生きていくって感じじゃなくて、なんかね、グループの中で生きていくみたいな感じのもう狭いとこを争ってわーってやってるし、なんか変なね感じのとこですよね。 だから長くいると僕なんかは精神的に良くないですよね。東京ですか？まあ何人か人いますけど、なかなかああいう場所だとなんかずば抜けてなんかなんていうのかな、日本国内の東京国内のなんかそういう中でごちゃごちゃやってるだけじゃなくて、ずば抜けてなんか突き出ててこう世界に目を向けてるような人っていうのはあんましいないですよね。それは何人かいるんですけど、そういう人は会ってて面白いですけど、なかなか街がそういうところだからやっぱりなかなか出にくいでしょうね、そういう人がね。だから心ある人は特にアーティストなんかね出ちゃう人多いんじゃないかな。結局日本でアーティストやって結局コマーシャルベースでねサクセスフルにならないともう全然意味がないわけだから。でね、僕なんか分かんないけど日本に行くとなんか「お前1年に1回ぐらいエキシビションしなきゃいけないんだよ」とかバカなこと言ってるでしょ。そういうのって全然ねなんかエキシビションのために作品作ったみたいな人が多くて全然無意味ですよね。自分でなんか表現したいのがあってできて、これを表現したい時にエキシビションをするなり自分のしたい方法でやればいいわけであって、それをどこどこのあそこのサロンでやらないと自分の経歴がねちゃんとキープアップできないとか、ああいうのはバカバカしいですね。そんなことを思ってて何が出てくるのかなっていうのがありますよね。だから結局物事の考え方がお金とコマーシャル的にしか考えられない人が多いんじゃないですか。だからもっとこうみんなこうね羽ばたいてこうね行かないと面白くないと思うのになっていう感じがするんだけど。
To talk about the posters and the flags really has to do with the context for symbols and signs. And my interest in that really comes about 1978 when I had a whole language already formulated and a whole kind of psychology that surrounds the work and the idea of making pictures. Because in the early 70s, in 73, I had the idea that I wanted to prove that stick figures lived lives, that a stick figure, an image is a living thing that we create through our perception of it. And so I was really going into these kind of virtual spaces, you might say. And then there were different other ways of describing these worlds, charts, maps, languages. So I had a whole kind of cosmology, you might say. And then at one point, it was always on paper, the idea to do it on cloth or to do it as a poster in the late 80s gave it contextual reference. So when the work was, when you put a sign on a poster, it means something very different than on a piece of typewriting paper. Or you put it on a flag, it means even more. A flag, Frank Stella used to talk about, or at least this is a quote I remember from art school, that he wanted his paintings to be very fast, that you would look at it and you'd get it in a second. But flags are faster than paintings. They just are, because they are meant to be understood. And you're supposed to be able to see it from a great distance and get it in a second. So it has a kind of power to it. So I was interested in that. And then I worked in granite. When you put a sign in granite, it means something even heavier than in a flag. And then so I'm very much interested in the adjectiveness of materials and contexts.
you think?
There's one day when we're open to the public, one day a week. So it's important for us to have a public and private kind of situation. Because in the private side, we enjoy working with collectors in a very close way, to help them build collections and to consult them in a very close way. And the public, because I think we're also provide a public service for artists and for the art community. And so it's important for people to be able to come here and see the art which is very fresh and which is created right now. This is from Japan.
Right. Hello.
So they're here, they're doing interview skits with different collectors and artists and dealers. This is Shiko Fujimori.
Congratulations. Absolutely not. I could never.
The artist creates, he doesn't explain.
Right. Is this your first exhibition? Or
My first solo show in New York.
what do you think about working with her?
They're incredible. A lot of which I find nothing but. They are incredible. I searched a long time and I'm very happy with them.
Well, I mean, I think that idea, of this kind of frozen moment of time is something that interests me a lot. The idea of that being captured in some way in film, and then taking and making that physical, making it a three-dimensional experience, but that at the same time, all the images are stopped in a way, frozen in time. That in relationship to this piece or another piece that was shown with it, this siren, the same kind of idea, but taking instead of the idea of light going into sound and that being a frozen moment of time, dealing with the phenomena of sound. So that was one of the things I was interested in, and but that coming from the perspective of film in a way, and how the power of film to capture and freeze time. I think, in terms of when I conceive of something, it always starts as something that's generally based upon a subjective experience that generally has something to do with memory. And I use that as a starting point, a need to somehow, need to go back into a moment of my life, reinvestigate that. But what I'm interested in making art is actually to draw from that, but to make the work actually become more universal, and open to other people's experience, or or just that the work is open-ended enough that it's not necessary to really to know where it came from in me. I mean, I think just in the way that music or film functions in the way of being a very clear indicator of a moment in time, and so that was, I think, my initial, my interest in using icons in the work, and that they really were the most direct way of getting to a moment of time in that way. That I, 1974. If I look at a picture of Evel Knievel, it reminds me of that year. So that was, a way of going through using an icon to locate a moment in time, and then expanding upon that into a sculptural form.
Lawrence has worked with an architecture called the Palace, which is a graphical chat environment. So chat rooms, which people are pretty familiar with from the internet, this puts a graphical interface. Most palaces look like rooms. They have chairs, they have sofas, they have bars. And what Lawrence has done is to strip it of any reference to the world as we know it and created kind of a floating...
Maybe it's more close to the world that we know, because in fact, it's about the fact that people are equivocating dreamtime space to digital space. And the trouble with dreamtime space is you have to accept all the assumed values of all of the structures that you're functioning in. If the web is going to open up any kind of a different value structure, it's going to have to present a two-dimensional surface that functions as three dimensions without reverting to shading and to tricks. Then when you meet somebody essentially in the palace, in Homeport, you in Homeport have to assume that they don't have any idea what you're talking about. The missionary position is not a question.
So here we find ourselves on, let's see, the shores of Long Island once more with Matthew Antezo. He's a young New York City artist. Do you want to just give us a shout out about how, where, when, where you come from, and how you jumped into New York?
Born in '62.
Right,
Born in 1962 in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Right.
And I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut, which is the town next to, and lived there until I was 18, and then I went to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City for 2 years.
And what were you studying?
I was studying art there. Yeah, I'd gone there because I had wanted to go someplace else, and to go to someplace else in America means almost like going to a different country sometimes.
Right.
So Utah was very interesting, and while I was there, I had the opportunity to study with Paul McCarthy, and that was an interesting point in my life because he introduced me through this course to a lot of art history that wasn't in the books, and showed us a lot of things that had happened. And this was in '84, so he showed us a lot of things that happened in the past 10 years, which I'll get back to later.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
But you were also saying earlier that you're really into kind of the last 30 years of contemporary art, and that's what you use to reference your paintings and stuff. Do you want to talk, chat about that a bit?
Yeah, I guess from about 5 years ago, I was doing these paintings that were kind of diagrammatic and trying to kind of locate myself within these diagrams that were map-like, and I found that the period I was kind of focusing on was around this time of the student protests and the Vietnam War, and I was thinking about how that period directly influenced artists. So I went looking for some kind of evidence, and through research I found in magazines and books and catalogs all of this kind of work that exists only in documents. It's kind of ephemeral work.
Right.
So.
And then so you reference that and then actually portray them visually on your canvases and stuff?
They're direct. Yeah, I take the pictures directly and use documents as the basis for the painting. So they're always also black and white to reference a photograph. I think that I use the photograph and then also the caption. I think, and using the caption part as a separate panel comes from my days as working as a photo archivist and working as a researcher.
Do you think that kind of New York City density affects the way you look at your work and the way, like a contemporary kind of milieu is operating in?
Well, I certainly think that the contact with other artists and people in my community affects the way that I think about my work, because I think in the end what I'm trying to construct is this kind of personal history of a community, and I'm starting to use things that are more closely to our time and looking at things that are kind of describe community, not only events but portraits and who the people are, who the figures are. artists, critics, curators, dealers, all these people that are in the scene.
Right. And you were talking earlier about like how you referenced this kind of communal kind of thing with paintings and sort of documentation of happenings and kind of stuff where there's kind of art as experience going on rather than like a two-dimensional thing. So do you want to chat about that for a sec? Or?
Well, I see that the artist experience, from a historical point of view, is you're kind of cut off from it, other than seeing it in a document.
Right.
So, my problem, the question I asked myself was, how can I experience this? So I thought a way to maybe even closer experience it was to make a work about it and to really read as much as I could about it. And part of my research, and the end of my research, being this painting that would send the viewer back into this place where I came from.
I was born in New Jersey, but I always wanted to live in New York. And when I bring people up here who have never been to the Chelsea before, and they talk to me about the wonders of suburbia and the peace outside of New York, I look across the river there and I say, that's where I came from. That's where I escaped from. I remember as a young art student coming to New York and walking through Greenwich Village and having fantasies of myself as a 1960s bohemian with a long skirt and sandals and long hair. And when did I come here? I came to New York in 1968. I came to New York to be part of what was happening in the United States at that time. I had become involved with the peace movement against the war, the movement against the war in Vietnam. And somebody took me to the theater in New York, and I saw a play. It was called Dionysus in '69. It was with a group called the Performance Group in a theater called the Performing Garage on Wooster Street. There were some unknown artists, unknown actors, like Willem Dafoe and Spalding Gray. And I came to the theater, and I was so inspired. It was theater in the round. It was the avant-garde. It was New York City. I had a magic marker and some rouge, and it was a political piece. And I loved it. And I loved the movement around the theater. And they said to me, come back anytime you want. And I did. I came back and I drew over and over and over again. And then they became my community in New York. It's a very special experience to live here at the Chelsea Hotel. And I'm a small town girl. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, across the river. And it's been a very special privilege to have a place that you can make a garden, where you can walk out on the rooftops of New York early in the morning in your nightgown and barefoot, and plant roses and pick weeds between the bricks of this building that was completed in 1883 for 10 artists to live in and find income from renting apartments below them. And sometime when I'm up here at night, I feel like King Kong, like I could reach out and pick a plane out of the sky. I feel, like the city is a wonderful space around me. And it's very privileged to live here. And to look, the Empire State Building is like a tree in my garden. Right now it's a Christmas tree in my garden. Would you like to see?